This is a devil fruit that actually earns its name, because One Piece has taken a sharp turn from wacky fun comedy to visceral horror experience with the appearance of what could be our first literal demon in the series. I mean, you've heard of Demon Child Nico Robin, but this is Demon Granddaddy Saint J. Garcia Saturn, and he has no time or patience for your assorted antics, nor does he have the strategic nudity for your aesthetic pleasures. In fact, it's really quite the opposite. You're not allowed to look at— no, I shouldn't look at— you're not allowed to look at him at all, because if you do, then your head will explode. And look, there's nowhere else that we could possibly start because a lot happens in this chapter, but crap on my toast and call it Vegemite. This may be the first time in One Piece where the name Devil Fruit accurately describes this new power. In this chapter, Saint Saturn emerged from what appears to be a demonic spell circle, and he assumed the form of a yokai, specifically an Ushi-Oni, which you can see depicted here, and I love yokai. In case you don't know, yokai is a general term for supernatural entities in Japanese mythology, many of which come equipped with really grotesque tales, this one included actually, and yet they're almost always drawn in such derpy ways. I mean, just look at this guy. He's just roaming around rural Japan going Saturn, however, is not derpy looking, surprisingly, and there's actually something seriously unsettling about his presence. A sense of terror that I don't recall ever having felt in One Piece before, because it's just, it's just not that kind of series. But mate, when that Marine looked at Saturn and his head exploded, that sent the coldest of chills down my body. That legitimately may have been one of the top 10 times that I was genuinely shocked by One Piece. Because here's the thing, I don't record reactions to chapters because I'm generally a very boring reader. I just sort of sit there in silence and go, that's nice. That or, that's not nice. But when this happened, I yelled, Jesus! And what makes it so much more effective, and yes, I'm gonna go into full Oda jerk-off mode here, but what made this moment so shocking was that something very similar happens earlier on in the chapter with Bonnie's powers, which I think answers a very sinister question that I've had about Bonnie's abilities, which is the idea of, well, can you just age someone to death? That or age them otherwise out of existence, I guess in either direction. Because what appears to happen here is that Bonnie, for a brief moment, ages the Marines to the point where they're decaying skeletons and then snaps them back from death. There is some question to exactly how this fruit functions, which this happens with anything Bonnie does. Because Vice Admiral Clamshell on a stick is confused about what happened and implies that it may have been a hallucination invoked by Bonnie, maybe showing the Marines an image of their future selves. I don't know though, I feel like my first impression is more consistent with what we know about Bonnie's fruit, the one where she's literally edging death, and maybe that state happens so quickly that it's only perceptible to the people experiencing it. So to Vice Admiral Clamshell on a stick, he's just like, mates, come on now, it's just a little whippy sword. What, are you all afraid of a bit of and who knows, maybe completely separately they are. Perhaps some of them have had experiences with Kujaku and have a bit of a whip-based PTSD. Either way though, this is a horrifying power and I can see why it mentally broke those Marines. But circling all the way back to, well, the point of talking about this, it's a horrifying power, but it's played for gags. When the Marine turns into a skeleton, he has that classic comical reaction, and then he faints when he turns back like a Pokemon. Very much reminding us that at its core, One Piece is just a fun, wacky adventure, where chances are nothing horrible is actually going to happen ever. But then the same thing happens with Saint Saturn, but different. The Marines are told not to look at him, and the one who does has his head exploded brutally and viscerally. And look, I really cannot emphasize just how much this sort of thing does not happen in One Piece. Oda very rarely, if ever, chooses to depict this kind of horror. Sometimes One Piece does unsettling stuff, yes. The example people usually bring up is Trafalgar Law having to hide in a pile of corpses, which is also horrific, but in a different way. That's more human-based horror, the sort of sickening commentary on the potential evils of humanity. Whereas this is straight up otherworldly demon horror. And I think it's very fitting that the first time Oda has done something like this is with a creature that appears to be genuinely demonic. And if Saturn had just appeared in this form, honestly, I probably would have laughed, because it looks all twisted and stuff, but it's still very much in keeping with the sort of goofy One Piece. But as the chapter went on, I began to think that Saturn, in addition to looking like a spider and a bull, also looks a bit like a sheep, because his beard expands and it gives him the appearance of an unsheared sheep. Oh, and it also succinctly answers the question of what would happen if Black Maria mocked Santa Claus. But also leading up to this moment has been pretty casual and fun. Even Luffy vs. Kizaru has been a pretty chill affair that neither side have taken particularly seriously. That's why it was so important to have that head exploding moment before the design was revealed. It was a, no, you sit up and take this seriously. Because yes, this is One Piece, but One Piece is not screwing around anymore. And looking at Saturn after that, I was just in awe, but the bad kind of awe. The kind of awe that makes you go, oh no. And it's one of the best character entrances in the series in my opinion. I think that Kaido jumping off a Sky Island is still number one, and it's going to be pretty impossible to top that, but this is a contender. One more thing I liked about the head explosion is that it's an ability that looks like it needs to be actively used by Saturn because his eyes go all glowy in the general direction of that poor marine dude, which probably explains how someone like Wapol could have seen the transformation and gotten away without his head exploding because the elders didn't notice him until it was too late. And speaking of, I have a lot more sympathy for Wapol's situation now. Before it seemed like he was afraid because he understood the political consequences of what he saw, but it's actually much more simple than that. Wapol saw 6 hell beasts conjured into existence. An authentic nightmare that from this moment on, he knew that he was going to be chased until a state of horrific death had been inflicted upon him. Meanwhile, Sabo, cool guy, definitely had a much more relaxed approach to things, all things considering. And what I don't think was quite captured in the official Viz translation was where he says, "To think that there was such a diabolical truth at the pinnacle of the world." You see, there's a bit of a dispute over this because other Japanese speakers have said that Sabo more accurately states something like, and I'm gonna read this, "There was no way I, Sabo, could have known that hell was located here, all the way at the top of the world." Something more like that. And after this chapter, I would have to agree with them because that fits perfectly. And even Saturn sounds demonic with his musings of, what's this? The surface? Oh, it's been a long time since I've been here. Which sounds straight out of Diablo, like something a Primeval would say after finding their way back to Sanctuary. And this fruit does seem to exist almost as a direct antithesis to the Sun God. Whilst Luffy's powers are lighthearted and happy, Saturn Zoan immediately plunged us into serious, bleak, and utterly hopeless darkness. And it does further contort the idea that these demons are occupying the skies and masquerading as benevolent gods of the world. And I think it's highly likely that the rest of the elders, as well as Imu, have devil fruits based on other yokai. And we may even be able to extrapolate exactly what kind of yokai they are with the silhouettes we've already been given. And interestingly, the circle that Saturn emerges from appears to be marked with the number 5 as well as a 5-point pentagram. So very in keeping with the elders' trademark number. And I wonder if this implies that this circle is an ability they all have access to with their various other almost certainly yokai devil fruits. Or perhaps each elder is assigned a number with Saturn being 5 and perhaps the lowest. The others would be 1 to 4 and Imu could be 0. And just one other intriguing feature of Saturn's powers is that from the spell circle we see a black lightning effect, which could imply an either overwhelming Conqueror's Haki presence or it could simply be a feature of whatever mythological magic is being invoked. It's hard to say at the moment, but it's still worth noting. So Saturn of course comes equipped with our now standard awakening shoulder clouds, a fairly invaluable fashion accessory in this era of One Piece. I mean, it's practically a faux pas to be a Zoan user and caught without one. And I'm starting to wonder if Oda has now redefined what a Zoan awakening is, because post Sun God Fruit, all new Zoan awakenings we've seen clad their users in these clouds. Even Kaku's awakening, and he's just a giraffe, not like a mythological giraffe, just a giraffe. But Zoans were actually the first awakenings we ever saw back in Impel Down with the Jailer Beasts. And arguably Monster Chopper with Enies Lobby, but the term awakening wasn't used until Impel Down. So I wonder if the Jailer Beasts have incomplete awakenings because they don't have their fancy clouds. And if so, that actually gives me a lot of hope for a new Chopper form in the future. Before we leave the Saturn topic though, look, I just want to put a thing out there. I'm assuming that this is a devil fruit. However, it's not said anywhere in this chapter that this is a fruit power. And look, I'm being potentially very intolerant to Saturn's ability identity by assuming that he is a fruit user. So what if he's just a demon? A creature so old and so kept in the shadows that the world has completely forgotten that these things even exist if they ever knew to begin with. I don't think that's likely because the trend in One Piece is that almost every weird thing that happens is explainable via magical fruit. But maybe, just maybe, the history of this world is hiding a few more secrets than we thought. To a bit of administration now, we've got a series of pacifista commands taking place place in chapter 1094. And I guess all I have to say is that, yeah, that didn't last long. Atlas takes command, and then Saturn almost immediately takes command back. And we also had another quick recap of the authority chip hierarchy. And look, this is a minuscule thing, but I feel like Oda has hammered in the authority hierarchy just a little too much. Almost every time a command is given to the Pacifista or the Seraphim, there's this quick recap of how the system works. And especially in this chapter, I think it would have been great not to have that recap, because it highlights that Atlas's actions are almost certainly futile, and there may even have been a good moment of shock to have Saturn take command and then do the reminder, rather than flag for the 100th time that yeah, he's definitely gonna do it. But in stark contrast to the Saturn events, Luffy vs Kizaru continues throughout the chapter, and it's as lighthearted as ever with a few key developments. One that we're touching on is the potential limitations of Gear 5th again. It looks like we've confirmed that Gear 5th can only really be used in short bursts, much like the gears before it, because after fighting Kizaru for some time, Luffy has run out of cartoon energy just like he did against Kaido. So I guess what he needs to do now is sort of like rejig his heartbeat again to the drums of liberation. But if Gear 5th was a boss fight, then Kizaru has now pushed Luffy into phase 2. I also loved Luffy's punch through Kizaru's head, and every time he uses a power like this, I feel a sense of phantom pain, because it just looks unpleasant to experience at the very least. That's probably an understatement. And even Kizaru admits that, this isn't a great situation to be in, and he and Luffy cancel each other out at the end of the chapter. Or I suppose more accurately, Luffy cancels them both out. Oh, but the really fun thing is that it looks like Kizaru might have actually made things worse for himself, because he shoots Luffy, which sends Luffy spinning, and that spinning may have ultimately added force to the eventual landed attack. And it's just amazing to see a panel of a character thinking while his brain is being quite literally fisted. This is art. But if I had to guess, I would say that neither Luffy nor Kizaru are going to be down for too long. However, it may be just long enough for something truly tragic to happen to the group currently standing in front of Spider Saturn. So let's talk about Jewelry Bonnie. She's a very important thread throughout this chapter, and at the end it seems to be implied that it was Saturn who gave the order for the gutting of Kuma's personality. Something that Bonnie must have seen in the flashback that we didn't see. Hence why she's all good with Vegapunk now, not his fault. And it makes sense because we see his title again in the chapter, but Saturn is the warrior god of science and defense. So Kuma, as a science, would very much be under Saturn's jurisdiction. And as a recap, right now we have Bonnie, Sanji, Frankie, Atlas, and Stella standing, sitting, and lying in their assorted positions before Saint Saturn. And even with Sanji in the group, I don't think this is looking amazing for any individuals here, apart from, of course, Saturn. Stella obviously knows Saturn because we saw the cover story where he went to meet the 5 Elder Stars. But now we can officially say that the first Straw Hats to meet an Elder Star were Frankie and Sanji. That's probably not an accolade that either of them are particularly pleased with right now, but it is what it is. One moment I did really like before we got to this point was tracking Bonnie down, because it was one of the rare occasions where Oda made great use of Sanji's pervert gag. The idea of his lady radar, and having Stella going, you know what, that doesn't sound like science to me, but yeah, let's go with it. And the other time I remember this working really well was on Punk Hazard, when he was able to hear that Tashigi was in trouble and came to save her. And I actually don't think it's out of the question that this isn't more than a gag. Due to his innate desires and willpower, Sanji could have accidentally trained his observation haki to be particularly sensitive to women, and I would 100% buy that as an explanation. But the final moment of big drama in the chapter is of course Bonnie stabbing Saturn, which is very emotional and everything, but look, I'm gonna be that guy and call Bonnie a bit of a hypocrite. Because it's not lost on me that this here Jewelry Bonnie is the very same person who stopped that there Zoro cut slicing a world noble on Sabaody, and now here she is stabbing the very noblest of nobles. Then again, what has she got to fear? Well, what are they gonna do? Call an admiral down? It's already happening. May as well kill the old man. And what I like is that Bonnie chooses to attack Saturn with the most archaic and painful thing that she can find. This isn't a very well thought out act. It's sheer anger and pain. Because if it was well thought out, then Bonnie might consider using her fruit abilities to age Saturn into an even more decrepit state, or even give him a near-death experience like the Marines earlier. Although story-wise, that probably wouldn't work. Oda would say something like, nah mates, his hakis are too strong for magical fruit powers. But it doesn't really matter, because there's something I really like about her using the sword, and that's the raw lashing out. It's the whole, you took my dad away from me, so now I'm going to take the you away from you. Look, I haven't thought this out very well. Stab. And the look on Saturn's face after being stabbed is just, Really? And I think we all know that no real damage has been done and that Saturn hasn't exactly been taken by surprise here. Actually, he might have been, but it's more the surprise of, Bonnie, mate, this is a surprise because I didn't expect you to do the stupidest thing possible. This right here is why I am in charge of the world. Also, if it turns out that Bonnie is actually a child, then this is like an old man watching his grandchild throw a tantrum. A sort of, look, I really didn't want to deal with this today, so just please calm down, child. But look, we've got 2 Vegapunks on the kill list standing right in front of Saturn right now. So you let me know in the comments, what are the odds of either Atlas or Stella surviving this encounter?